In our last video, we talked about variables and ended on a little bit of arithmetic using those variables. I'll go ahead and clean this up so we only have a variable for cost, tax, and our print function. This leaves us with a small bit of code that calculates the cost of an item after adding tax. But what if we want to calculate the after-tax value of multiple items? Well, we can duplicate these lines a couple of times, and then we can add some new variables. Let's declare one to represent our new cost. We'll call it cost2. We'll do this once more, and we'll call this one cost3. And then we can update our new print functions to use those variables. Great. Let's complicate this even farther. We'll say that some items can have the 7% tax that we originally declared, but some items might have a 10% tax. Let's go ahead and update the last print function on line 12 to use this new tax value. To me, this code is already starting to feel messy. When you think about it, we actually have a really basic algorithm or a set of instructions for our code to follow. Dart, like most other programming languages, has a concept of functions. Functions are self-contained modules of code that are used to accomplish a specific task. Functions usually take in data, process it, and then return a result. With this in mind, it's easy to see how we could have a function that takes in the cost and the tax rate and then prints out the value for us. Go ahead and Control-Z or delete code until you have what I have on my screen. Now we'll go ahead and define our function. So outside of the curly braces that belong to the main function, we'll create a new function called print_tax. We'll provide variables with their type name inside the parentheses. These are called arguments. Outside of the parentheses, we will add curly braces. Everything inside the curly braces is referred to as our function body, and that's what will be executed whenever we call this function. Now we'll copy the previous print statement we had on line 4 and paste it in place of the one on line 8. We'll also need to update the word tax to tax rate because we no longer have a tax variable in scope. Our function argument is called tax rate, so we need to use that here instead. Lastly, we need to call our function. Calling a function is as simple as typing the function name, followed by a set of parentheses, and inside those parentheses you pass data for the function's arguments. This might leave you wondering, that print statement that we have on line 8, is that a function? Yes it is. Because we're defining these variables and then calling the print_tax function right afterwards and not doing anything else with the variables, they've become a little redundant. Because we're not using the variables anywhere else, we can inline the value of these variables as arguments to the print_tax function and remove the variables altogether. Now we can duplicate the code that calls the print_tax function a couple of times, and we can change the arguments that are being passed to those functions to represent the variables that we had originally. That's $5 on line 3 and $100 on line 4, and a 10% sales tax on line 4 as well. Dart has two forms of optional arguments, named and positional. We'll get into named arguments later, but for now, we're going to use positional optional arguments for our tax rate. To do so, we can wrap the argument name and the type in brackets. You'll notice the red underline in my IDE. The Dart tools are telling me that I have an optional argument, but I don't have a default value provided to it. Let's go ahead and add one now. Because most of our calculations are going to use the 7% sales tax, we'll set that as the default value. Now the whole point of making this optional was so that we could remove the 7% sales tax from the call site on line 2 and 3. We'll still want to keep it on line 4 because we want to use a different value than the default. Great, in this video you learned how to clean up your code with functions and how to use optional positional arguments. I hope to see you back for the next video. Don't forget to check out the playlist for more Dart and Flutter instructional videos. And if you're interested in receiving notifications about when new ones go live, don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell. Thanks.